bones of the wild, and life, forsworn, rise from death. Blood of our blood.
Congealed blood flows once more. The heat of fury courses across his breast. Vengeance inhabits all depths of this revenant risen in foul ritual. A flesh-made weapon, his very heart replaced with the seed of the Briarheart tree, twisted to a new essence, entwined and stitched savagely into the open cavity, binding the warrior to the natural forces of the world. An echo of the Creator made heartless for the world to be.
For the Reach!
You've surely visited the Reach, a land of rifts and cragged bluffs carved by the torrents of the Karth River, and perhaps you have encountered its natives, particularly its most hostile.
First you, then all of the Reach!
Markarth, meaning above the Karth in the Reach tongue, is the place you are most likely familiar with. Once in ages most ancient, it was Nachand Zel, a Dwemer stronghold built deep into the roots of Karthmad, the mountain that stands at the head of the valley, itself part of the vast Druidarch mountains which split the delineated borders of modern High Rock and Skyrim. Today, Markarth is the seat of power within the Reach, one of Skyrim's 9 holds ruled by Jarl Igmund. But this region has a history long and storied, a place rife with contest and conflict, mystery and malice, perhaps even the very birthplace of humanity, if certain legends are to be believed. It would be easy for us to get lost in the long ago, and there is a realm of fascinating histories and theories to discuss. But to begin, I think we shall speak of this ancient place and its people in terms most present and familiar. As you first encounter this lithic landscape, something primal stirs within. Perhaps it's the saber cats perched on jagged cliffs dressed in juniper, or rather the hostile natives, ink-faced and pelt-draped, ready to bludgeon you to death with their toothed clubs. These are the Forsworn rebels, native Reachfolk committed to the liberation of their lands from Nordic occupation. The important distinction to be made here is that while the Forsworn are Reachfolk, not all Reachfolk are Forsworn. If you manage to reach the small cradles of civilization alive, such as Markarth or Karthwasten, you will encounter ethnic Reachfolk completely unaffiliated with such dissident movements. You can identify them most easily by their names, which broadly correspond to Celtic naming conventions of our real world: Cosnach, Omulag, Morven, Braig, Riada, Duach, Alaric, Phelan, and so on. Some may also wear face paint or even tattoo their faces, for example Bothella, who runs the Hag's Cure apothecary.
Only that they break an old woman's heart. So many friends, so many kin, all lost trying to rebuild a past that was over long ago.
When you first enter the city of Markarth, the age-old conflict is bubbling before your very eyes.
The Reach belongs to the Forsworn!
The Reachmen Waylan murders, or attempts to murder, depending on how quick to action you are, a Nordic woman named Margaret. Waylan is slain soon after, and you're quickly approached by an onlooker, Eltrus, clearly a Reachman himself, his face tattooed in their fashion. He gives you a letter and urges you to help uncover a conspiracy within the city.
This has been going on for years, and all I've been able to find is murder and blood. I need help. Please. You find out why that woman was attacked, who's behind Waylan and the Forsworn, and I'll pay you for any information you bring me. It all started when I was a boy. My father owned one of the mines, rare for anyone who isn't a Nord. He was killed. Guards said it was just a madman, but everyone knew the murderer was a member of the Forsworn. I've been trying to find out why ever since. Gotten nowhere so far. And then I got married. Have a child of my own on the way. I swore I was going to just give up for my child's sake, but it's like my father's ghost is haunting me, asking me why.
If you ask Eltrus for more details about the Forsworn, he says,
"They're remnants of the old rulers of Markarth, natives of the Reach, followers of the old ways. The Nords drove them out of the city, Ulfric Stormcloak and his men. That was about 20 years ago. But somehow they're still here, and they're killing people." What
Eltrus is referring to here is what historians call the Markarth Incident. The Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion had raged from the 171st to 175th year of the Fourth Era, and as you may well know, this was a devastating theatre of war with bloodshed unmatched in recent eras.
When the Aldmeri Dominion invaded the Imperial City, the Legion all but turned a blind eye to the other provinces. Many of the disgruntled natives of the Reach used the opportunity to depose the Empire and founded what they called an independent kingdom. It was little more than a chaotic uprising, but the Reach was removed from Imperial authority for 2 years before we reclaimed it. But the leaders of the uprising refused our offers of peace. They fled into the hills and became the Forsworn.
The Reachmen Kingdom of Markarth lasted between the years of 174 and 176 under the command of King Madanach. Igmund and his father, Jarl Hrolfdir, were desperate to retake their hold, but could not do so on their own. Ulfric Stormcloak and his militia offered to help the Jarl and the Imperial authorities, and they accepted this help on conditions they could not uphold, those being the restoration of free worship of Talos. This topic could take us on unlimited tangents, so I will refrain from getting into the weeds of how this reflects on Ulfric or the Empire, but within the source, The Bear of Markarth, The Crimes of Ulfric Stormcloak, by the Imperial scholar Arianus Arius, he says this about the Forsworn Kingdom. And yes, Ulfric Stormcloak did quell the rebellion without Imperial assistance. That much is true, but what the bards often fail to tell in their stories is that the Forsworn Kingdom was quite peaceful for those 2 years they were in power. True, some crimes were committed against former Nord landowners, often those accused of being the harshest towards their native workers, but on the whole, the Forsworn ruled their lands fairly, and were making overtures to be recognized by the Empire as a legitimate kingdom. In the wake of the aftermath of the Great War, you can imagine the backlog on stately matters the Empire had. Before a peace treaty could be resolved with the Forsworn, a militia led by Ulfric Stormcloak sieged the gates of their capital, Markarth. What happened during that battle was war, but what happened after the battle was over is nothing short of war crimes. Every official who worked for the Forsworn was put to the sword even after they had surrendered. Native women were tortured to give up the names of Forsworn fighters who had fled the city or were in the hills of the Reach. Anyone who lived in the city, Forsworn and Nord alike, were executed if they had not fought with Ulfric and his men when they breached the gates. "You are with us, or you are against Skyrim," was the message on Ulfric's lips, as he ordered the death of shopkeepers, farmers, the elderly, and any child old enough to lift a sword that had failed in the call to fight with him. This is a source perhaps trying to elevate the Reachfolk as innocent victims in this situation. That is not to disbelieve the idea that Ulfric and the Nords could have unleashed all kinds of brutality as they retook the city. However, the reason this has to be noted is that the projected innocence put upon the Forsworn, I think, is done to amplify the perceived villainy of Ulfric rather than assess the Forsworn's stewardship and moral stature. The author tends to hand-wave the Forsworn uprising, emphasizing that it was a little bad, but hey, it was only the Nord landowners, and it was definitely the ones who were most harsh to the natives, and they ruled the lands fairly. Source? Trust me, bro. Look, I love Reachmen culture, it's fascinating, but as we continue to explore their history, culture, and faith, you will find that their moral sensibilities are not what I would call palatable, and given direct experiences with the Forsworn in the wilds of the Reach, I think it is difficult to take this source seriously. I think the most well-balanced and likely more accurate take is that both the Nords and the Reachfolk will employ all levels of brutality in order to press their claims and secure their safety, as is the case with most war and conquest.
Markarth and the Reach are our lands. That is why we are the Forsworn. We cannot claim the home that is rightly ours. But then, during their war with the elves, we had our moment. We drove the Nords out of the Reach in a great uprising. Then Ulfric and his men came. Those of us who didn't run were executed, except for myself, my king, and a handful of others.
Nordic occupation undoubtedly has been brutal for the natives of the Reach in recent history especially. I believe that the Forsworn Kingdom was put down brutally, and an example was surely made of the figureheads. In the years following, many Reachfolk would be thrown in the Sidnamine jail unjustly, innocents mistaken for or in proximity to discovered Forsworn agents, or even victims of Forsworn murders, being accused, locked away to mine silver, forever forgotten to the world above.
My family has owned Karthwasten for generations. Rare for anyone in the Reach that isn't a Nord. Not that it does me any good. Nords think I'm working for the Forsworn. Forsworn think I'm working for the Nords.
As you progress in your investigation of the Forsworn Conspiracy, you will find out that Madanach, the now dubbed King in Rags, is alive and running his rebellion from the inside of Cidhna Mine.
Madanach, the King in Rags. While we were off fighting the elves in the Great War, Madanach was busy ruling over the Reach, until Ulfric came and put them down. When their uprising was crushed, I had Madanach brought to me. He was a wild animal, but a useful one. I offered him a stay from execution if he used his influence to deal with any annoyances that came up. Competitors, agents, idiots. So I've let him run his little Forsworn rebellion from inside Cidhna Mine. Now he's out of control.
For your part in trying to unearth Thonar Silverblood's dirty secret, you are thrown to rot in Cidhna Mine along with all the Reachfolk he has imprisoned. You will understand their plight intimately.
There's no resting your hide in a cell in this prison. Here you work. You'll mine ore until you start throwing up silver bars.
I had a daughter once. She'd be 23 this year. Married to some hot-headed silver worker, or maybe on her own, learning the herb trade. The Nords didn't care who was and who wasn't involved in the Forsworn uprising. I had spoken to Madanach once. That was enough. But my little Aethra didn't want to see her papa leave her. She pleaded to the Jarl to take her instead. And after they made me watch as her head rolled off the block, they threw me in here anyway to dig up their silver. I'm not Madanach. I was never a leader of the Forsworn. The only anger I can justify is my own. But every family in the Reach has a story like mine. There are no innocent onlookers in this struggle, just the guilty and the dead.
An absolute killer line. Just the guilty and the dead. Silver-stained hands, throats of rust, they toil in grief, kept sane only by their hopes that rest in the hands of their king, Madanach.
This was our land. We were here first. Then the Nords came and put chains on us, forbid us from worshipping our gods. Some of us refused to bow. We knew the old ways would lead us back to having a kingdom of our own. That is who we are, the Forsworn, criminals in our own lands, and we will cut a bloody hole into the Reach until we are free. I had Markarth. My men and I drove the Nords out. We had won. So we thought. Retribution was swift. I was captured, quickly tried, and sentenced to death. But my execution never came. Thonar Silverblood stopped it. He wanted the Forsworn at his call, that I would point their rage at his enemies and spare his allies. And I have. Humiliating at first, but I knew he would let his guard down eventually, that he would come to trust I was under control.
King Madanach, Ard Madanach in traditional Reachfolk title, has for over 20 years bided his time orchestrating a Forsworn rebellion from the inside. But now Thonar Silverblood has lost control of his hidden asset, the very king that the public thinks was executed all that time ago. How surprised they are when, with your help, if you help, that a band of Reachmen led by Madanach escapes from the jail and rampages through the city as they escape into the wilds and retreat to Druidoch Redoubt.
It'll take years, but I'll organize the Forsworn again. We'll reclaim our land, and then when power is ours, we'll have peace. A kingdom. Until then, let me offer you a warning. Beware the Forsworn. No place in the Reach is safe from us now.
This outcome surely puts the Reach at no rest, and Madanach would become a powerful figurehead for the Forsworn to rally behind. The Forsworn, especially with a symbol of hope at their head, are a dangerous threat. Truly consider the extent of Forsworn resistance. Their camps are spread all about the borders of the Reach, hampering trade and raiding caravans.
Rayrick, how is the Reach faring against this Forsworn menace?
Things are bad, Igmund. Our forces are barely able to keep the Forsworn in check. Merchants are reporting the loss of more of their shipments.
This is why I say we take the fight to them. Gather the Legion and drive those blasted beasts out of the Reach for good.
And what do Legion soldiers know about the hills of the Reach and the caves that make up those hills? The Forsworn can hide and ambush every assault.
The safety of the city and our settlements must be our only concern, Igmund. The rest of the Reach is on its own.
Cowards, both of you. My father would not sit idly back and wait while evil men take over his lands. We're done discussing this for now.
Jarl Igmund's advisors do have excellent points. The Forsworn thrive through guerrilla warfare, ambushes and the like. As natives, they have intimate knowledge of the landscape with hidden cave systems and passes of which the Nords have little knowledge, as traditionally they have kept to the centres of civilization, needing only the few roads of travel. The wilds of the Reach have always been the domain of the Reachfolk, and this stubbornness, the unwillingness to dissolve, to just die off and disappear, has been an essential component of their millennia-long survival.
And unto the mountains they fled, for the world grew dark with shadows which sprung from the heart of Lorkh, who though greatly sundered still believed in the light of man. Long before elves or Nords conquered the region of Qarth, tribes of humans inhabited the caves of the Druidoch mountains. It was in these dark places they learned of their new purpose, and it was there they sang songs of fading dreams.
I will expound upon the origins and all the theories relating later, but the importance of these statements is that they convey for just how long the Reachmen have inhabited this land of the Qarth River. Fun fact for those unaware, a reach in geography is typically a stream or river, usually suggesting a straight, level, or uninterrupted stretch. The first time that the Reach really enters the historical record in any significant way is during its first conquest by the First Empire of Nords, which began its rapid expansion from Skyrim starting year 222 of the First Era. The Reach was conquered, and this would have been the first time it experienced significant Nordic occupation. What follows for centuries is a mess of conflict between Durrani elves, Nords, even Imperials, all while the native Reach folk deal with subjugation. We have little record of the details, but given the presence of Dwemer ruins throughout the Reach, and also given that the Snow Elves inhabited Skyrim in the Merethic, no doubt there was some level of interaction between those elves and the Reach folk. Consider that the Forgotten Vale, the sprawling glacial valley in which the Snow Elves built their sacred chantry of Auriel, is situated within the Druidoch Mountains themselves. Interestingly, there is a source clearly talking about the degenerated Snow Elves we know as the Falmer. The Fish People in Dark Places. Our first tale comes from a Reach Veterans, or history keeper, whose tribe lived in the mountains above Markarth for decades. Many years ago, she said their scouts reported sightings of startlingly humanoid creatures coming and going from the caves below where the clan lived. At first the clan thought these creatures to be goblins, yet these goblins were hairless, eyeless, and had dead grey skin like that of a fish. These Fish People, as the clan took to calling them, had never approached the camp and never attacked any Reach folk. Yet the clan refused to take chances with such obvious abominations. As a people of oral histories alone, no doubt the Reachmen have forgotten some of their past interactions or reinterpreted them into folklore and legend, as is with the Fish People. However, one of the most well-known stories, even by broader civilization, is the legend of Red Eagle, which takes place around the Elysian Empress Hestra's attempts to pacify the Reach, thought to be around year 1030 of the First Era. The legend of Red Eagle is a tale of great importance for the Forsworn, a tale of unyielding resistance, a spirit which has inhabited the Reach folk for millennia. Long ago, a child was born in the Sundered Hills. They named him Phelan, which means Red Eagle in the tongue of the Reach, for the screeching bird call that greeted his birth and the crimson blooms on the autumn hills. Thus began his legend. Reach child, born under auspicious skies, his very name the colour of blood. 10 kings ruled the Reach in those days, and though men were free, the people were scattered and warred amongst themselves. The augurs foresaw the boy's destiny, a warrior without peer, first and foremost Lord of the Reach, chosen to unite all under his name. Phelan grew in years and strength, and it seemed the prophecy would be fulfilled. The banner of the Red Eagle was raised along the cliffs of the Reach, and his people prospered. Then came Hestra, Empress of the South, riding to war. One by one the kings stood before her. One by one they fell aside, bending knee in imperial bargains or slaughtered on the battlefield. Her legions came at last to the Sundered Hills, and envoys were sent to bargain for their surrender. Phelan refused to yield the freedom of his people, but the elders were afraid, cast him out, and accepted the imperial yoke. Thus was stolen by the foreign invaders his land, his people, his very name. In the years that followed, Red Eagle became known as the untamed spirit of the Reach, unbowed, unbroken, stained by the blood of his foes. He gathered loyal Reachmen to himself, those who clung to the old ways, who yearned for freedom and forged a new nation. Together they fell upon the occupiers and the traitors by night, disappearing into the cliffs and caves each morn, evading capture. It was not enough. For every imperial control and garrison they wiped out, yet more seemed to march from the green south to replace them. One night, under a cloud-choked sky, the men of the Red Eagle warmed themselves over damp fires of smouldering moss. A huddled, shambling figure came to them, cloaked in rags, face cowled. Though his men mocked and cast stones at the stranger, Phelan sensed something and beckoned. The cowl was thrown back in the dim light, and she revealed herself to be one of the ancient and venerable Hagravens. She offered power for a price, and a pact was made. Thus was brokered to the witch his heart, his will, his humanity. From that day forth his was a spirit of vengeance, pitiless and beyond remorse. The rebels grew in strength and numbers, and none could stand against them. Phelan's eyes burned coldly in those days, black opals reflecting a mind not entirely his own. 2 years passed, and the foreigners were all but driven from the Reach. Such peace could not last, however, and a great host fell upon them, a swift army of invaders unlike any before. For a fortnight, Hestra's generals laid siege to Red Eagle's stronghold, till he himself came forth for battle, alone and robed in nothing but his righteous fury. 1,000 foreigners fell before his flaming sword, and the enemy was routed. Yet when night fell, so too did he. The warriors who came to him said Phelan's eyes were clear again on that final night. He was taken to the place prepared for him, a tomb hidden deep within the rock. With his remaining strength, he presented his sword to his people and swore an oath. Fight on, and when at last the Reach is free, his blade should be returned, that he might rise and lead them again. Thus was given for his people, his life, his dream, his sword. But when every debt is repaid in blood, these he shall reclaim once more. Certain scholars suggest that Red Eagle was the very first Briarheart, and while this is debatable, we can at least surmise that Phelan popularized the ritual, and his heroism most certainly popularized this sacrificial process. We'll speak more of Briarhearts later, but one could see how this tale of Red Eagle could ignite the undying fury of the Reachfolk. For thousands of years afterwards, Phelan has inspired the men and women of the Reach to fight no matter the odds, to preserve the old ways. But what are these old ways, these old gods that the members of the Forsworn relentlessly reference?
Before the Nords came, we worshipped the old gods, had our own kingdom. Times have been good and bad since then, but some folks couldn't handle not ruling their own land. Those are the Forsworn. The Forsworn follow the old ways, but some of those were best forgotten. Blood sacrifices, communing with Daedra. It's the road to ruin.
In Skyrim, we receive little formal education on the matter, their worship hidden behind a vague menagerie of pagan-like imagery. Witchmen, or witchfolk, is an epithet that they have, no doubt, earned due to their infamous sacrificial rituals, commune with the Daedra, Briarhearts, and their advanced hedge magic. While loose in definition, this hedge magic, or reach magic, seems to be described by outsiders as a wild magic without formal structure, often considered profane and corrupting, as subjective as those terms may be. The easiest way to understand hedge magic, in my opinion, is to think of it as unconventional magic, arcane knowledge not formally understood by Tamriel's broader population, and it is often connected to or derived from a connection or pact with a deity, spirit, or hag. This escape of precise definition also applies to their religious conceptions and the diversity of their devotions. What is meant by old gods and old ways is going to be hard to define. We must understand that the Reachmen are an eclectic people of different clans and customs. They are inherently fractured in tradition and character, but simply stating this fact is not helpful in trying to understand the old ways. The Reachmen have a shared ethnicity, geography, and history, which has caused some common features to bubble to the top of this melting pot of complexity. Within and between the many clans of the Reach, there is a class of Reachfolk who are dedicated to the preserving and retelling of history. They are lore-keepers and storytellers, much like myself, gathering the tales, traditions, and feats of the clans, learning and preserving them for future generations. These people are called Veterans, and they are greatly respected for their role in passing down ancient traditions through poetry and song. It is through the oral traditions of these Veterans that outsiders have been able to gain a greater understanding of the commonalities that bind the Reachfolk, uncovering the essential uniting elements of their mythologies. An invaluable resource is the 5-volume series of books The Great Spirits of the Reach by Vashu Gramorga, chief Daedro theologist at the University of Gwilym, written in the Second Era. The Reachfolk worship many spirits, both great and small. In truth, there are as many faiths as there are clans in the Reach. Some clans might worship a sacred elk or the spirit of a mountain spring. Others might sacrifice goats to ghosts of ancient heroes. There are some spirits, however, that transcend clan boundaries. Those we in the rest of Tamriel recognize as the Daedric Princes. While a selected list of Daedric princes may narrow the scope more than one that includes sacred animals and water spirits, the list is still vast. Several clans have taken to the worship of Daedric princes such as Nocturnal, Malakath, Mehrunes Dagon, Molag Bal, but above all are 3 Daedric princes in particular. The closest thing that the Reachmen clans have to a chief deity is Hircine, the Daedric Prince of the Hunt. Looking at members of the Forsworn traipsing around the barren fells of the Reach with their cervicorn cowls, I think the assertion that this costume is related to veneration of Hircine is correct. Chief among the Reach pantheon is Hircine, Prince of the Hunt. Names vary from clan to clan: Old Elk Eye, Hunt King, Beast Father, Skin Shaper, and the Spear with 5 points. Like all Reach gods, Hircine is regarded as a cruel teacher. Indeed, Reach folk do not call their articles of faith beliefs, they call them lessons. But those who heed Hircine's lessons grow swift, strong, and cunning. For a Reach hunter, these physical manifestations of faith are far more important than any of the nebulous ethical concerns debated in the temples of the divines. Hircine is the avatar of the fierce and terrifying now. He tells his followers that life is lived breath by breath, and all creatures are predator, prey, or both. This engenders a sense of urgency and constant wariness that often leads to conflict, but also keeps Reach folk safe. In the heart of a Hircine worshipper, there is no rest and no expectation of rest. For the uninitiated, such faith sounds exhausting, but the fruits it bears are difficult to dismiss. Reach folk maintain a level of focus and athleticism that few races can match. While brief stillness waits at the end of the hunt, there is always another hunt on the horizon. It is a fundamental distinction, lessons as opposed to faith. The gods of the Reach are not abstracted into representations of intangible spheres like commerce, law, or morality. Rather, they have a practical element to them. Their lessons are directly applicable to survival and the success of the people. Listen to their perspective of Peryite. Reachfolk place great emphasis upon natural rhythms and the pitiless march of time. Everything that exists will pass. The fort that rises too high will fall. The clan that starves will one day grow strong. This eternal balance is the work of Peryite, the master of tasks and the lord of order. In many ways, Peryite serves as a vital foil to the primacy of conflict. While wars and plagues may inflict grievous wounds, the taskmaster ensures that the world always returns to its natural and intended state. As is the case with most cultures, Reachfolk associate Peryite with blights and disease, but unlike other people, Reachfolk see no malevolence in illness. Quite the contrary, lives extinguished by disease make room for healthier, more vibrant Reachfolk to take their place. Like wildfires, diseases serve as a revitalizing force of nature, a necessary check on the hazards of abundance. I imagine that this perspective of their deities as lessons, essential components of life, including suffering, would pertain also to the spirits, ghosts of heroes, sacred animals, and the Hagravens that they venerate. Their worship has a practical benefit pertaining to their geographical location or way of life. Reachfolk recognize only two worlds, the world of flesh and the world of spirit. While Hircine reigns supreme in the world of flesh, Namira, the Spirit Queen, rules over the infinite realm of spirit. Even among Daedra worshippers, Namira is usually regarded with fear and suspicion. Her traditional sphere of influence inspires instant revulsion in mortals. Chilling mysteries and the inevitability of decay lie at the heart of most mortal fears. But in the Reach, her dominion extends far beyond mere slugs and darkness. Reachfolk see Namira as the avatar of all primal dualisms, life and death, beginnings and endings, possibility and entropy. All fundamental competing forces flow from her realm of spirit. While most religions strive for some sense of harmony, Reach theology is inextricably linked with conflicts like these. This obsession with conflict as an essential force of existence no doubt plays a role in their belligerent attitude towards outsiders and each other. Paradoxically, most Reachfolk do find some measure of peace in Namira's teachings. Clan witches often describe Namira as one who gives and takes, giving life and taking life until the spirit finds deep wisdom. A scribe named Gemma Pamphilius was given the opportunity to see reverence of Namira firsthand and recounted her experience in her book, Namira's Dance.
Many Reach clans do not allow outsiders into their lives, but the Boldclaw clan graciously welcomed me when I introduced myself as a scholar. They allowed me to sit in on one of their ceremonies in which they honor the Daedric prince, Namira, sometimes called the Spirit Queen, or more dramatically, the Goddess of Death. Namira is seen as a spirit of darkness and endings, although Reachfolk see her as a spirit of rebirth too. The Reachfolk consider Namira to be a powerful force in their natural world, though they do not worship the Daedra in the sense that people in other parts of Tamriel worship the divines. For example, the beings they call spirits play an important role in Reachfolk life. The Reachfolk engage in a give and take relationship with the Daedra, forming agreements for assistance with everyday tasks and challenges. The Boldclaw deeply respect Namira. They honor her effect on both death and life with an ancient ceremony. Words do the vision of such a ceremony no justice, but I will try to describe what I witnessed. Namira's dance required the participation of the entire Boldclaw clan. Every member, from the smallest child to the oldest hunters, gathered around a large fire in the center of a clearing. Most wore dark colors, with dark paint smeared across their faces and throats. Yet others arrived naked, to symbolize how they are born into the world. Those who are able dance together in a dizzying display of both death and rebirth, both terrible and beautiful at the same time. Blood is spilled during these dances, though I was never able to determine the source of the violence. And perhaps violence is too harsh a word. The blood was almost lovely as it caught the light of the flame, like melted rubies. Some swept the color under their eyes, others pressed handprints into the dirt. I sensed that they honored the blood as much as they feared it. I think that is really at the heart of Namira's dance. Speaking for myself, I've kept a rather traditional view concerning the Daedric princes, Namira especially so. It's a view mired in fear and disgust, and one that the Reachfolk do not seem to share. They view Namira in a positive light, and the ritual I observed was full of beauty. It may sound strange to those of us not of the Reach, but I'm sure if you saw it for yourself, you would agree. This place and its people are not without loveliness.
Reading these texts, it's interesting to find similarities between early Chimeri theology, or I suppose contemporary Dunmer theology as well, as revived through the Reclamations, in which they view suffering and the cruelty of the Daedra as a test which they willingly subject themselves to so that they may be cut into better shapes. Transcendence through suffering. Dunmer also view Lorkh in a different light, viewing Mundus as a proving ground for ascension, as opposed to the prison of a cruel trickster as the Ultima do. The Reachmen do share a similar perspective, viewing Daedra as lessons, a relationship of give and take to enhance both body and spirit. Scholars often dismiss Reach theology as simple Daedra worship, but the great spirits of the Reachfolk extend beyond the Princes of Oblivion. Like many human cultures, people of the Reach venerate Lorkh as well. They know him as Lorkh, the spirit of man, the mortal spirit, or the sower of flesh. According to Reach myths, Lorkh convinced the Spirit Queen Namira to grant him a place in the infinite void where he could create a realm for wayward spirits. Rather than a vibrant paradise, Lorkh created a hard and painful place, a realm that taught through suffering. While some resent Lorkh's cruelty, most praise his wisdom. According to the Reachfolk, those who suffer most know best. Hardship is a means to wisdom and glory, and Lorkh provided hardship in ample supply. Lorkh supposedly still walks among the mortals of Nirn. He appears only once in a great while, braving the pain and sorrow of the cruel world he created to aid the Reachfolk in times of desperate need. My research indicates that the dreaded Briarheart ritual may have begun as a reflection of that immortal sacrifice. Without a doubt, for the Reachmen, Lorkh, Namira, and Hircine are vital to understanding their place in the world. Namira, the Spirit Queen, Lorkh, who sacrificed his very heart to create the world, a testing ground for spirits to grow stronger, and then Hircine, the inheritor of Lorkh's creation, the embodiment of the material world and the moment-to-moment existence of its creatures. Hircine is the chief deity whose lessons are essential to the Reachmen's millennia-long survival. It is worth noting that the Reachfolk never utter the name of Lorkh in prayer, for his part in the story of the world ended long ago. It is Hircine that guides the Reachfolk of the now. Unlike in other cultures, Reachfolk mythology involves Hircine in the natural cycles of the world, such as the seasons. Hircine is believed by the Reachmen to have 5 aspects, each representing a different facet of the prince. Alrabeg, the hunter, who wields the Spear of Bitter Mercy, is the form that most Hircine cultists across Tamriel would recognize, a fierce hunter with the head or skull of an elk. He bears the Spear of Bitter Mercy. He comes here from the hunting grounds to hunt new prey, or he brings prey native to the hunting grounds, like the unicorn, to hunt in new forests. If he brings not prey, then woe betide you who meet him, for he may dub you the hare. Then you must flee as best you can, though you will not escape. Though aside from this more broadly accepted depiction, the Reachfolk recognize 4 other aspects. There is Storibeg, the man-beast, king of the wolves. He wears the wolf skull totem and his growl is like a landslide in the Karth Gorge. He comes here to hunt with his children, the skin shifters, or to adopt new children and turn them pelt side out. His howl will freeze your innards like a pond in evening star at midnight. You will see your death approach, but be unable to flee. As the winter solstice occurs and the days henceforth begin to lengthen, Storibeg stirs. In the Vale of the Karth, as autumn wanes, the wolf pursues the sun. Storibeg would eat the orb and make moonlit nights reign eternal, and so the Reachmen invoke Hrokebeg, the bear, to restrain the man-beast and allow for the longer days of summer. Hrokebeg is the bear aspect of Hircine. He embodies the totem of claw and fang and comes here seeking solitude, peace from labours, and renewal of the burning spirit within. Beware, for if you rouse him and disturb his serenity, you will be torn asunder. But if you approach him with deference and an offering of honey-sweet mead, he may grant you the power of the bear heart in your next fight. There are 2 other aspects of Hircine. You may meet the Great Stag, who is invoked as Urakenbeg, and whose hooves drum the blood summons. He comes to mate with the hinds, and may transform a comely woman for that purpose, or to cull the herd of the weak. Those who hear his drumbeat are doomed to run with the herd, and may follow him back to the hunting grounds, where they will be chased and unmade. You may also meet the Quick Fox, who is invoked as Gulibeg, and who wields the Wand of Bone. He comes here to confound mortal hunters, to run them in circles until they are so plexed and wildered that they follow him over a cliff or into a trackless mire. He may fill you with such fury that you can do naught but pursue him, or he may note you as clever and teach you his tricks. Gulibeg the Fox interestingly shares some overlap with the Nordic conception of Shor, who is known by the Reachmen as Lorkh, or Lorkh by the Elves. Shaw's animal totem is the fox, and in several mythologies of Tamriel, he is regarded as a trickster in archetype. Reachmen tales tell that Gullabeg fashioned a shard of bone from Lorkh's ribs into a wand that could confound any mortal. This is identified with the Wand of Bone, one of Hircine's totems. These items in particular will tie into theories I'll present later, so keep them in mind. But symbolic similarities aside, Gullabeg the Fox is said to have taught the Reachmen tricks and secrets that have helped them survive the fall of Lorkh. It is unclear whether Lorkh's sacrifice in Reachman mythology involved tricking other beings, like the Aedra, into taking part in creation. However, the suggestion that Gullabeg had to help the Reachmen survive the fall of Lorkh seems to imply that Lorkh himself faced adversity in some form, which would also affect the Reachfolk. It is important to remember that within such a diverse society of oral traditions and eclectic practices, one that has been constantly assailed and occupied by foreign forces such as elves and Nords, inevitably contradictory sources may appear, and in lieu of any formalized temple or religious order, there will be no established canon to which all Reachfolk adhere. Even the aforementioned Great Spirits of the Reach book is the scholarly treatise of an outsider identifying the commonalities between the clans, that being a common understanding of creation involving Namira and Lorkh, as well as Hircine as the inheritor of Lorkh's domain, that is the world of flesh. So in saying that, it's possible that some Reachfolk in early eras were exposed to elven stories of Lorkhan the Betrayer, and the Reachfolk identified with this theological villain of their enemies, building more context to their own mythology, and perhaps also Nordic exposure reinforced the conception of Shaw, the cunning fox, to be integrated in some way into the narrative of their world, becoming Gullabeg, the fox aspect of Hircine. Remember that the Elder Scrolls universe is a story, a world of manifest metaphors in which contradictions are implicit to the structure of the universe. After all, what greater contradiction can exist than the interplay of Anu and Padme, Anuiel and Sithis? All is everything versus all is nothing. And from their meeting, the grey maybe that is Mundus arises. Philosophical waxing aside, let's refocus on the Reachmen themselves.
Daedra? Oh, the spirits. The old ones. Yes, I've heard them called that. The world is full of whispers, for those with the patience to hear. Most them bloods are just too busy begging pardons from dead gods to pay attention. Pity. Daedra, spirits, crows, it's all the same. Where you see evil gods, we see teachers. Cruel ones, for certain. But that's the world, right? A stone will kill you if it strikes your head, but lifting the same stone makes us strong.
The Reachmen do not worship the Daedra exclusively as some kind of rule, unlike perhaps the Chimer. However, the entire conception of Aedra versus Daedra is dissolved into the shared category of spirits. Make no mistake, Daedra take up the majority of Reachman focus, and in the context of the 201st year of the Fourth Era, these Daedric princes are certainly the old gods in question, the old ways being adherence to the harsh lifestyle implicit in their lessons. Again, there would be all kinds of variations depending on local geographies and clan traditions, but above all, I think it is fair to name Hircine and Namira as chief among these old gods of veneration. The distinction of old gods and old ways is made most clear in contrast to what would be the new gods and the new ways, which is never explicitly defined either, but it is fair to say that these would entail worship of the 8 divines and assimilation into imperial Nordic culture. For example, Eltrys had several lines of dialogue suggesting direct faith in the divines.
I'm so sorry. I hope the 8 give you more peace in the future.
And again, we have lines of Kedron, a native ostler who works at the Markarth stables.
Before the Nords came, we worshipped the old gods, had our own kingdom. The Forsworn follow the old ways, but some of those were best forgotten. Blood sacrifices, communing with Daedra. It's the road to ruin.
Which is an outright decrial of Reachfolk traditions, clearly favouring integration. This, I imagine, is the perspective of most Reachfolk natives assimilated and living within Markarth's society. But of course, among them are many Forsworn sympathizers, and there would be those who yearn for their tradition. Interestingly, Markarth, and more broadly the Reach, is quite the hub of Daedric presence, with 3 of the Daedric quests of Skyrim taking place in this region. Deep within the basement of an abandoned house in Markarth, there is a shrine to Molag Bal, and there is a shrine dedicated to Peryite upon a mountain, as well as one built within the Dwemer ruin Bethardams, though this one is likely built by the afflicted. And we also have the hidden Namira coven of cannibals that have a shrine built within Reachcliff Cave, led by Aola, seemingly a native of the Reach herself, given she is classified as a Breton and her name is congruent with the Celtic naming conventions of the Reachfolk. It's not a stretch to suggest that these Daedric cults have been born out of the many Daedra-devoted Reachmen clans native to the land. Splintered cult origins aside, the old ways in the current day seem to be championed by a particular class of individuals, and I'm not speaking of the Vaetishans, of whom we have no interaction with in Skyrim. Rather, I speak of the Hagravens. The relationship between Hagravens and the Reachfolk is abundantly clear, a relationship that extends as far back as the First Era, when Red Eagle made a pact with Hagravens to become what may have been the first Briarheart. Today it is common to see the Hagravens taking the role as a sort of spiritual guide or venerated figure cohabiting with the Reachmen. Such examples are found in Cradlestone Tower, Blind Cliff Cave, Bleakwind Bluff, the Carthspire Camp, Lost Valley Redoubt, Hags and more. Yet despite their abundance, we are still unsure of their true natures and the full extent of their relationship with the Reachmen. Hagravens themselves are not a phenomenon exclusive to the Reachmen either. They are described as creatures who have traded their humanity for access to powerful magics, grotesque abominations that seem some putrid combination of bird and human. Some have speculated that their powers are connected to the Daedric prince Namira, which would align with their foul appearance, as well as with their role as matriarchs of the Forsworn, who as Reachmen revering the old gods no doubt venerate Namira as the Spirit Queen. On the other hand, theories regarding her connection to Nocturnal are also valid. Consider that the Crow Mother, nether niece of Nocturnal, and sire of the Crow Daedra of the Black Feather Court, which itself rules one of Nocturnal's pocket realms, appears like a Hagraven. Either way, both Nocturnal and Namira have confirmed histories of worship within Reachfolk culture, and so it is possible that these Hagraven matriarchs were once Reach witches themselves, continuing to propagate the old ways to the Reach clans. The details of their role within Reach society also remains a mystery in totality. However, what we do know for certain is that they do, to this day, perform the rituals which create the legendary Revenant warriors, the Briarhearts.
Heart of Thorn, bones of the wild, in life forsworn, rise from death, blood of our blood.
These bare-chested barbarians, brutal and bellicose, have their hearts wrenched from their chests and replaced with a Briarheart seed stitched savagely into an open cavity, transforming them into something more than mortal. Often they are considered undead, revenants in the sense that they are ritualistically reanimated warriors without a heart, the essential component of all mortal things. However, these Frankenstein creations are not actually undead. Spells such as Detect Dead, or other sunlight spells, or the biting edge of silver weapons do not affect them any more than any other living mortal. They are beyond life, but not of death, transformed by dark magics to defend kith and kin. By some, it is thought to be a symbolic reenactment of Lork's sacrifice with which he created Nirn itself. Symbolic may be an understatement, as they really do have their heart ripped out, and they experience a great deal of pain and suffering in order to wield this power for the good of their clans. Despite the suffering, it is a great honor to be chosen worthy of the Briarheart, and there are several practices that have accompanied the process, such as long meditations and ritual scarification or other ascetic rituals, in order to mentally prepare themselves to embrace a beyond life of pain as the price for great power. As is the case with the diversity of spirituality among the Reachmen, each clan has different practices regarding preparation for the ritual, or even the ritual itself. For example, among the Reachfolk of the Cinderheart clan, who revere Molag Bal, they undergo what seems to be a purification of sorts, in where an open chest cavity is filled with hot coals to blacken and char before the Briarheart is then placed within. Regardless of the specifics of the ritual, as per each clan eccentricity, Briarhearts become near invincible warriors of vengeance in the tradition of Red Eagle. Remember, Remember, child of the Reach, Phelan's bloody story. Remember, remember, child of the Reach, Red Eagle's final glory. Shrieking eagles cried his name as he rose from mother's womb, a child born with a blood elk's eye, whose rage spelled Diamond's doom. Despair, despair, as Hestra came, southborn hag of Whitestone Tower, with bands of iron spears and shields, she turned the king's hearts black and sour. He warred and howled as seasons passed, slaying the Empire's daughter and son, but Reachfolk fell by Arwen's spear, till clan friends he had none. At last he traded his eagle's heart to the ravens who covet our power. In his breast they planted the briar seed that grows from the corpse's flower. Thousands fell to his flaming sword as the blood sun rose and set. Despite the bite of 100 arrows, he fought till death he met. Let all remember Phelan's rage, for it dwells in the heart of us all. Any who covet the sacred reach will suffer our spears and fall. The mysteries of the Briarhearts and the Hagravens that procure them remain mostly unknown. Their dark magics have remained inaccessible to most outside of the Reach. However, one source, the care and feeding of the Briarhearts, provides some degree of insight.
Today I got to see the process up close. It starts with a corpse. The Winterborn prefer to use the corpse of an enemy, but the Hagravens have no such compunctions. Any corpse will serve their purpose, whether an orc, a Winterborn, or even a harpy. Once a corpse is procured, it is purified in a strange ritual of the Hagravens' own devising and placed in a specially prepared plot of soil. Then with great reverence and fanfare, the Hagraven adds the Briarheart seed to the planted body. Spells and blood serve to feed and water the macabre garden, and soon the first sprouts begin to bloom from the corpse. The sprouts quickly grow into saplings, which in turn grow into small trees. These small trees connect through a system of roots back to the large tree the Hagravens and tree tenders care for in one of the fort's courtyards. I believe that the sapling trees contribute to the health and overall power of the large tree, but my questions on the subject were ignored by Galku and the other Hagravens. Meanwhile, Briarheart fruit blooms on the saplings and the large tree alike, beating a haunting cascade that echoes throughout the fortress. Once the fruit ripens, it is ready to be transplanted, and that's where our own warriors come into the picture. In most cases, when a Winterborn warrior falls in battle, a Hagraven can bless the warrior with a ripe Briarheart. The magical process plunges the Briarheart into the fallen warrior and returns the warrior to life, granting him or her additional strength and fortitude as befits a Briarheart warrior. Now, I haven't yet been privy to the process, but I believe there's also a way to implant the Briarhearts into living warriors. I've seen the cages where some of our most powerful and loyal warriors have gone to meditate and prepare themselves for elevation to Briarheart warrior status.
To state the obvious, this ritual is seen as barbaric as the rest of Reachfolk culture, which on the whole shirks the now millennia-old norms of mainstream Tamrielic civilization. The absolute pinnacle of warriorhood among these crossbreeds are the Briarhearts. Communion with Hircine has allowed their hearts to be cut from their chests and a ligament of poisoned briars sewn in their place. Legend states that these atrocities are invincible. Feign no surprise if werebores and werewolves are among the ranks of a Reachmen battle nest. These blessings of Hircine are seen as highly prized, not a woeful curse. When we know that Hircine is considered the chief deity of the Reachfolk, lord of the arena, supreme in the world of flesh, avatar of the fierce and terrifying now, it's no surprise that the Daedric Prince's curse of lycanthropy lacks the evil and corrupting connotations that so much of broader Tamrielic society holds about werecreatures. Reachfolk also welcome Hircine's truest servants into their midst as protectors and guides. I speak, of course, of werewolves. Few Reachfolk describe lycanthropy as a blessing, but they accept it as a useful condition. The werewolf suffers on behalf of her clan and causes enemies to suffer in turn. Reachfolk clans are known to count werebores and werewolves among their ranks, perhaps even werebears, as these are the were-creatures found across the regions of High Rock and Skyrim, which the Reach itself divides. Storabeg, the man-beast, one of Hircine's aspects that we discussed earlier, would no doubt have greater importance to the Reachfolk Skinchangers who can shift form from man to a terrible beast of power. In the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, you will have likely met the Companions and joined their ranks, even succumbing to lycanthropy yourself. If you choose not to divest yourself of your your beast blood and remain a werewolf, you may receive quests from Aella to retrieve special totems of Hircine, each of which bestow unique powers upon a lycanthrope. In the book, The Totems of Hircine, these 3 artifacts are said to be dated to a period in which men could neither write, not speak, nor barely think, but the powers of the blood of the beast were yet flowing strong among the selected. This is truly fascinating. We must remain cautious that this can merely be hyperbole to elicit awe at their ancient heritage, but who knows, perhaps this is an accurate statement. Who could have these people been, if they existed at all? Elves of the continent claim shared lineage with the Oldmer, who, after Aldmeris was lost, arrived at Somerset and proliferated from them into the various subcultures, Dureni, Chimeri, Ayleid, and so on. Some elven lineages are not completely accounted for, such as the Dwemer or Falmer, and we do have contradictions regarding the origins of the Bosmer. I personally think that the Dwemer emerged as a split from High Velothi culture, before or as the Chimer began their descent into a lower tribal culture. Snow elves share much of the same culture and religion as the Oldmer, and so I don't think it unlikely that they were some offshoot similar to the Dureni elves that would come to rule High Rock, though I'm also a fan of other theories. All this is to say that I would think that this book, The Totems of Hircine, when speaking of people not being able to write nor think, are not regarding the elves. As for the Nords, they do not arrive onto the scene until later, after the Snow Elves, and so I don't think it would refer to them either, as they could most certainly speak at the least. This leaves us with the Needs, the broad cultural brush with which all pre-Nord humans are painted, including natives of Cyrodiil and High Rock. In Reachfolk tales, as kept by the Vaetishrans, they...
And unto the mountains they fled, for the world grew dark with shadows, which sprung from the heart of Lorkh, who though greatly sundered still believed in the light of man. Long before elves or Nords conquered the region of Qarth, tribes of humans inhabited the caves of the Druidoch mountains. It was in these dark places they learned of their new purpose, and it was there they sang songs of fading dreams.
These claims suggest that the humans of the Reach were essentially here since the dawn, since Lorkhan was sundered. 2. We spoke early of Gullabeg, the fox aspect of Hircine, who according to the Reachmen helped their ancestors survive the fall of Lorkh, presumably by showing them where to hide in the caves of the Druidoch mountains. To take this story at face value is to take the claim that the Reachmen have been here since the Dawn Era, the original inhabitants of this region. Perhaps they at this time could not speak or write, like the book The Totems of Hircine states. The Totems of Hircine are referenced within Reachfolk mythology as related to several of Hircine's aspects, and in all likelihood they are of Reachfolk origin, considering they pertain directly to their mythology, not shared by other races of man. They also share many of the aesthetic motifs of the Reachfolk, skulls, bones, hides, and the like. These early Reachfolk would not appear of the exact same ethnic qualities as the Reachfolk of the Fourth Era, who seem mostly Breton in heritage, with a significant mixture of elven blood. The improved guide to the Empire contains this rather scathing description of their heritage. It was the other infiltrators who infected Reachmen blood with the mongrel taint. Breton, Elf, Daedric, Imperial, Nedic, Nord, and even Orcish blood pumps through the uncaring hearts and degenerate minds of these brutal clansmen of the Qarth Canyons. Using deduction, we can eliminate all of these admixtures with the exception of Need when it comes to the earliest inhabitants of the Reach. In all likelihood, the earliest Reach folk would have shared ethnic similarities to the Nedic peoples. However, this term Need is applied so broadly to Merethic era and early First Era humans that in function it nears worthless when trying to discuss the panoply of human peoples around in this time, from the silver-skinned Kothringi of Blackmarsh to the Duraki Needs of Northern Hammerfell to the Druids of Galen that inhabited High Rock. That being said, Needs are of particular fascination to me personally. I love to wonder what pre-Elven, pre-Nord Tamriel would have been like. The Out of Atmora theory is one that tries to place all humans as migrants from an Atmoran fatherland, just merely at different times, but this theory is accused of being propaganda for imperial unity. Personally, I think the presence of such a diverse and widespread population of Nedic tribes predating Ysgramor's arrival, predating even the invading elves, the Ayleids in Cyrodiil, the Dureni and High Rock, who subdued them as slaves or peasantry, I think it's reasonable to hold the idea that they all migrated out of Atmora as suspect. This discussion could grow infinitely in scope as we talk about the origins of the needs, so I want to keep it grounded and look to the similarities between Nedic cultures of neighbouring regions to the Reach in particular, so that we may try and discern the nature of their earliest culture. This could be a lengthy discussion, so perhaps it's best to just come in and drop a bomb first and then try and pick up the pieces. I believe that the earliest humans on Tamriel, collectively Needs if you like, were originally Daedra worshippers. A loaded term, I know, but let me clarify. I believe the Reachmen serve as a cultural isolate, preserving echoes of a mythology and culture that was shared by most Nedic inhabitants of Tamriel. Let me first start by saying that Aedra and Daedra are Elven terminology, defining gods by ancestry. Aedra meaning our ancestors, Daedra meaning not our ancestors. In a land not yet dominated by the elves, this terminology would not exist, and hence have no cultural relevance, much like how the Reachfolk of today simply refer to all as spirits, denoting the Daedric princes as great spirits, as they have the most agency in the world. Like I just said, Daedra is a loaded term, and the mind immediately wanders to the more demonic of princes, deities such as Molag Bal, Boethia, or Sheogorath. However, I would suggest that the gods worshipped by the Needs of the Dawn corresponded to their usefulness and presence in their daily lives. Hence, I think it's abundantly clear why Daedric princes such as Hircine would be front and center in the pantheon of worship for tribes of early hunter-gatherers, largely at the mercy of the natural world and her dangers. Let me show you these pictures of Nedic armors from tribes spreading from Hammerfell through Cyrodiil into Skyrim, bordering territories near Morrowind. What do they have in common? Horned antlers. Now, this does not necessarily mean they worshipped Hircine, but it's clearly a widespread Nedic motif, at least at the time when such armor was contemporary, which was about the late Merethic, early First Era, which is thousands of years since the proposed dating of the Dawn Era, which is 2,500 years before the First Era begins. The early hunter-gatherer humans, the natives of the Druidarch, predate these needs by millennia. Still, perhaps this widespread haunt motif is due to an ancient heritage of Hircine reverence, a reverence that the Reachfolk maintain to this day. And two, they style their headdresses with horns in the Hunt Lord's honor. Symbolic similarities aside, I do not mean to make such immediate conclusions. There are, however, more explicit connections. There was one Nedic group of tanned brown skin identified by the name Ket Keptu, or just Keptu, who existed in the hinterlands bordering Cyrodiil and Skyrim. They were known for the construction of the Bloodroot Forge and were profound smiths of their age, perhaps producing armor for neighboring tribes in trade, which would explain the uniformity of Nedic armor styles across the north of Tamriel. This is what is said about the Bloodroot Forge. Shunned by the Nords as a place of evil, this mystic forge site was constructed by an unknown Nedic sect that worshipped forgotten dark gods. Now it's been reopened by the Dreadhorn clan of Reachmen, who are meddling with dangerous forces of great power. The Keptu were an oral society with only scant beginnings of writing in the forms of glyphs. But we do know they did have reverence for Hircine. They used bears as hunting companions, and young Keptu bear clubs received fresh markings once each season to gain Hircine's favour. We can also look at the Keptu horn skull sallet, of which is said, the similarity of this traditional Nedic skull helm to the skull sallets of the Reachmen is strong evidence of the ancient cultural interchange between the tribes of the Needs and the clans of the Reach. Is the prevalence of Hircine worship within the Keptu culture a result of cultural exchange, or is it the hallmark of their shared ancestry with the Reachmen, some kind of early proto-Need? Either way, the Reachmen Dreadhorde clan of the Second Era descends from the Keptu and worshipped Hircine as well. I think that animism may be a useful term in this discussion. In simple terms, animism is the belief that a spiritual essence, a soul if you will, is innate to natural phenomena. Plants, rivers, rocks, animals, the weather, people of course, everything. They don't really have gods of abstract concepts such as justice or mercy, but rather spirits that embody the natural world. This is more akin to what I think the earliest Needs would have believed. And it's not dissimilar to the Reachfolk of today. I think that rather than scary words like Daedra worshipper, Animism seems to better encompass both Reachman belief and what I speculate to be the original state of belief for the earliest humans of Tamriel. Mehrunes Dagon is a being that embodies floods and storms, Hircine the cycle of seasons, athleticism, and the predator-prey dynamic of the world. Namira is the all-pervading essence of death and rot implicit in a mortal world. Nocturnal is the embodiment of the night, Peryite the embodiment of sickness and change, a spirit whose forces cull the weak and allow for new growth of the strong. In Reachfolk belief, the Daedra that they worship as great spirits are connected to the functions of the world around them, and that is why they are considered lessons. It is a belief that, to me, seems to correspond better with the connotations of animism as opposed to the demon worshipper connotations that typical Daedra veneration conveys. They also explicitly, varying from clan to clan, worship animals, rivers, trees, and other aspects of the natural world. So, to clarify my point, I'm inclined to think that the earliest of humans, the precursor to needs if you will, the people who first sought shelter in the caves of the Druidic mountains, had a faith of animism, a recognition of the material world with spiritual essence, some of which includes the spheres of the Daedra princes, who, mind you, can also directly interact with mortals, as opposed to the rather abstract and voiceless deities worshipped as the divines. I also want to note that in Blackmarsh there are several antiquities such as the Silverwish medallion and a Nest of Shadows sculpture, both of which are evidence supporting the existence of the Kothringi, a Nedic people of Blackmarsh, coexisting on Tamriel at the time of the ancient Argonians, and at that the medallion dated to the early Merethic era indicates imagery of Clavicus Vile, a Daedric prince. This is some archaeological evidence that indicates Nedic presence on Tamriel in the early Merethic era worshipping Daedra, which again favours the idea that Daedra worship was included in early Nedic systems of worship, pre-Elves and pre-Nords. I also want to point out that this animism perspective does align thematically with the last notable Nedic societies that faded with the arrival of the Garda waves in the 9th century of the First Era. High King Durcorach presided over a council of Nedic kings, each of which with epithets that sound fitting for an animistic people: the Blood, Flame, Forest, Frost, Shadow, Spirit, Storm, and Sun Kings. But all we really know about these peoples at the time, already thousands of years prior to the 4th era of Skyrim, is that the Cult of Stars was very popular. Whether or not this was Nedic in origins, we can't really say, considering that both the Aelids and Dwemer were known for their observance and study of the stars, both of whom enslaved the needs of Cyrodiil and Hammerfell at various points. Unfortunately, we enter very murky waters in this discussion because there are very few isolates of Nedic culture in existence, therefore very few groups that could preserve the earliest systems of belief. The needs of Hammerfell, Cyrodiil, and Hyrok were at various points conquered or enslaved by Elvish peoples and their cultures largely displaced. Take for example the Nedic slaves of the Aelids in Cyrodiil, who worshipped the Old Mary pantheon as they no longer knew any other. The 8 divines were created by Alesia as a compromise between the Nordic gods, whose origins are found in the animal totems of Atmora, and the Old Mary gods, meaning that the Nedic peoples of Cyrodiil essentially ended up worshipping a synthesis of exclusively foreign gods, their pre-slavery systems of faith mostly lost to history. The subsequent primacy of Cyrodiilic empires and the Nordic powers of Skyrim have gradually superseded whatever native beliefs may have existed. We spoke of the Keptu, which was a culture of reasonable proximity to the Reachmen Clans, and funnily enough, they too had a reference of Hircine. Well, on the other side of the mountain range, the Western Reach and beyond, to what we know as Hyrok, there were several Nedic peoples that predate the colonization of the Durrani Elves, whose forced copulation resulted in the mongrel race we know as the Bretons. Perhaps by shedding light on these people, we may glean more insights into the earliest humans of Tamriel. The Druids of Galen, like the term Dothraki needs, is a retroactive nomenclature used to speak about an ancient people of whom we have little intimate knowledge. Again, like many of these early human societies, we are dealing with a people that have no or little written record, rather oral traditions. The name Druids of Galen refers to a mythical person or place with several proposed identities. Druid Laurel of the Stone Law on Sistris says,
"If it seems like I'm stalling, it's because I am. Because you're not going to like the answer I have to give you. I don't know where the name Galen comes from, and I believe that anyone that claims otherwise is telling you a falsehood. I can tell you a number of stories though. Galen, it's said, was the name of a spirit that walked from the heart of the forest into the midst of an ancient Proto-Breton settlement. They were the one to sing the songs of Ifri to our ancient forebears. They were the one to teach us the ways of the green. Or, if you believe another tale, Galen was the name of the first archdruid, the first druid queen. She was one of the very first needs to channel the songs of the singer, and rose to lead the first circle in the deep woods of High Rock. Or, in yet another telling, Galen was the name of an island in a lake, a place of sacred worship where Ifri's heart could be felt beating even here in the realm of mortals. It was there, on that island, where our forebears heard the songs and learned to tend the groves. Which one is the truth? Honest to God and objective fact? I have no idea. And despite years of study and attempts to answer that question, I'm no closer today than I was the day I began to translate the ancient tablets. All we know for certain today is that the name holds a special place in the heart of my people. It is a name conveying solace, home and hearth, reverence and conservation. And so we are, and always will be, the Druids of Galen, wherever our travels take us in the world.
These Druids of Galen we speak of, regardless of certainty about their namesake, were the native group of Nedic inhabitants at the time of the Durrani arrival in High Rock in the late Merethic era. In this already long video with quite a theoretical tangent going on, I don't want to get into some in-depth Druid discussion, but merely want to establish that the closest geographical influence to the Reach was likely the Druids of Galen. Druids, of course, have a type of animistic belief that's centered around the green, essentially nature, not known by the name Ifri until later elven interactions. I wonder how much this could have influenced the Reachfolk. Perhaps even the Druids of Galen first migrated from the Druidarch Mountains themselves after the dawn. Perhaps their worship of the natural world did not preclude potential Daedra worship at the time, only being snuffed out as pro-Aedra Durrani came and subdued the Nedic populations of High Rock. Interestingly, among the Bretons, particularly the Belladama Weird, the Triskelion symbol is used, and for the Reachfolk, their ancient shrines to Lorkh also use the same Triskelion symbol. Certainly not conclusive, but thought-provoking. The Belladama Weird and the Glenmoral Weird were both early offshoots from the Druids of Galen, eschewing civilization in favour of the wilds, a sentiment that many Reachfolk share. Consider also that the Glenmoral Weird, in particular, are inclined towards Daedra worship, Hircine, Molag Bal, Namira, Maynard's Dagon. They even have creatures like the Hagravens among their ranks, perhaps the original source of Hagravens in the Reach. There is lots to think about here, but ultimately we can only wonder at what it was like for the native humans of Tamriel in the mid and early Merethic eras, and that's only if we agree upon the native to Tamriel theory, as opposed to the out of Atmora one. I will say, I feel as if the Daedra worship of the Reachfolk has to come from somewhere, and my personal belief is that worshipping Daedra, in a time when they did not even have the elven stigma, embody many facets of the natural world, and hence would be included in an animistic belief of nature as a whole. Perhaps after thousands of years of occupation, subjugation, conquest, and denial of their way of life, the Reachfolk have progressively turned to darker gods of the Daedra, or have been influenced by their brutality, whereas perhaps the Reachfolk ancestors of the Druidarch caves were more akin to the other nature-worshipping needs. We're likely never going to be certain about this, but look, I think the raw diversity of Daedric faith amongst the Reachmen clans should at least raise some eyebrows regarding the origins of such beliefs. And if the Reachfolk truly have inhabited the Druidarch since creation, and all invading forces, be it Elves, Empire, or Nords, are typically anti-Daedra, well then you could put two and two together and come to the conclusion that Daedra worship was endemic to the Reach. Speaking of clans, there are likely hundreds, and even the list of ones we know is large enough. Bearheart, Black Drake, Black Moon, Black Oath, Boldclaw, Bone Shaper, Cinderheart, Crow-Eye, Crowwife, Dark Witness, Deathwing, Doomfang, Dragonclaw, Dreadhorn, Eagleseer, Ghost Song, Grimfang, Heart Eater. Jeez, it's like listing C-tier metal bands. Hill Hunter, Hornstride, Ice Reach, Mistrunner, Quicktalon, Rageclaw, River Elk, Shadefeather, Shadow Bloom, Shunned One, Six Ford, Skyweavers, Spirit Blood, Spirit Dancer, Spirit Tail, Stag Heart, Star Singer, Stone Talon, Strange Hollow, Thornroot, Timberclaw, Timbercrow, Treeshade, Twisted Briar, Wild Blood, Wild Spear, and Winterborn. And of course, the hundreds that we don't have records of. Some are tied to certain places, some are nomadic, some warlike, some calm, some cannibals, some werewolves, some valiant hunters, others dark witches. The Reachfolk clans are one of the most eclectic mixes of people in Tamriel, never truly codified or unified except in the fewest of circumstances. Of all the clans we know of, it is the Black Drake that probably holds the greatest infamy, one attached to the annals of world history. You see, A Reachman would become the Emperor of Cyrodiil, establishing a dynasty known as the Longhouse Emperors during the interregnum period of the Second Era, a far cry from their state as eternal rebels resisting occupiers in their homeland. The reign of the Longhouse Emperors all begins with the Tagh Droiloch, a name which means High Dark Wizards in the dialect of the Reach. Unlike most Reach covens, the Tagh Droiloch were made up exclusively of witchmen, not witches, and they soon demonstrated an aptitude for summoning and commanding even the most powerful Daedra. The Tagh Droiloch easily broke several rival covens standing in their way and made themselves the secret masters of the Reach. For years, the Tagh Droiloch seemed content to bide their time, allowing the dread of their name and whispers of their displeasure to govern the unruly Reach for them. But 9 years ago, an exceptionally strong and clever chieftain by the name of Durcorach arose and began to build a following in the Reach. Despite his lack of learning, Durcorach was a sorcerer of no small skill in his own right, although he preferred the sword to the stave. As if the Tagh Droiloch at last had found the man they had been waiting for, this secret coven allied itself with the Black Drake and placed their power and their fearsome name at his command. With the aid of the Tagh Droiloch, Durcorach subdued all rival clans in the Reach, demanding their loyalty. Reachmen I have spoken to sometimes hint at bargains struck with Daedric powers and promises too fearful to repeat, but whatever the truth of these tales, the results were clear. Within a year of his adoption by the Tagh Droiloch, Durcorach commanded 2,000 spears. Within 2 years, he commanded 10,000, and at last, judging his strength sufficient to his ambition, he unleashed a horde many times that size upon an unsuspecting Tamriel. The rest is, as they say, history. It would come to light that the Tagh Droiloch ultimately made a deal with Mehrunes Dagon regarding the creation of the Four Ambitions and a plot involving the merge of Tamriel and the Deadlands, as you do. But let's not dwell on the future events of the Elder Scrolls Online Blackwood chapter. Instead, let us refocus chronologically to the rise of Durcorach the Black Drake. The hagiography, The Crowned Dragon, speaks highly of Durcorach, commissioned in the first year of his reign, year 533 of the Second Era. What can be said of a man who changed the world, who delivered countless multitudes from the darkness and sinful sloth of a society drowning in its own decadence? Who put to flight the corrupt elites, fattening themselves on the wealth of a people so deluded and disillusioned they no longer knew what justice was? What can be said of Durcorach, the Black Drake, Cyrodiil's savior? Where would we be without long overdue reckoning and redress of wrongs he brought to us? Bow down, O Cyrodiil, and give thanks for your liberation. Surely the birth of a new era is at hand. Durcorach's story begins in the clean wilderness and snowy mountains of the north. A great comet blazed across the sky on the night of our future emperor's birth, and 7 sevens of silver swans flew over his mother's humble shelter in the hour he came into the world. All who beheld the infant were struck by the strong beauty of his young face, with eyes so dark and fierce that great warriors could not bear to meet his gaze. It must be said that our future emperor was raised in no palace befitting his magnificence, but rather in the humblest and hardest of environments. The great wilderness of the Reach is home to many trials and dangers, but these challenges served only to strengthen the boy emperor from his earliest days and teach him the value of courage, honor, endurance, and wisdom. At the age of 3, young Durcorach saved his mother's life by seizing his father's hunting spear and slaying with one fell stroke a great black bear that had already devoured 20 warriors. And when he was only 5 years of age, Durcorach saved his village from starving in a cold, hard winter by hunting a herd of 100 elk from Carthwayston to the high peaks of the Druidoch Mountains. Mighty in the hunt from the time he could walk, Durcorach soon learned wisdom as well. The eagle taught him how to hear the tidings of far lands carried on the winds, and how to see into a man's heart with a single glance. The swift, icy stream leaping down from the peaks taught him to make music so lovely that no one who heard the boy emperor sing could ever again find joy in any lesser song. And the great grey wolves taught him the meaning of courage, loyalty, and leadership. In his hard homeland, young Durcorach soon found it necessary to master the ways of war. On his 7th birthday, a tribe of giants as tall as 100-year-old trees invaded the peaceful pastures in which his people kept their flocks. The rest of the manuscript is charred and unreadable. No doubt this is largely propaganda to validate Durcorach as a legendary hero, a noble savage who has come to deliver Cyrodiil from its bloated decadence. Durcorach, of course, is presented as salvation for the Cyrodiils, and this propaganda was pushed relentlessly for the reign of the Longhouse Emperors. Whether or not it had any great influence, it's hard to say, but in the grand scheme of things, this novel dynasty was but a blip on the timeline. Still an impressive blip for a people usually relegated to the role of perpetual victims of conquest in mountain backwaters. So, Durcorach the Black Drake united all the Reachfolk clans and conquered Cyrodiil by the year 533 of the Second Era. Then he was crowned Emperor. He married Varaxia Tharn, a member of a prominent Nibonese family, in order to help cement his rule, though his son Moricar was not of her blood and was born in the year 518, the Second Era, in the Reach, to a different mother. From the secret history of the Longhouse Emperors. Emperor Durcorach was known for his imposing stature, his skill with blades, and his savage temper. While he could never shake the obvious origin of his patterns of speech or his mannerisms, he nevertheless attempted to embrace the imperial culture. He forged a new elder council in 534, appointed imperial tutors to educate his son Moricar, and attempted to merge Reach sensibilities with imperial culture in an effort to win more support in Cyrodiil. In that same year, he married Varaxia Tharn of the prominent Nibonese Tharn family to reinforce his connection and commitment to the empire. An aide to the Elder Council named Sentanus Marilyn wrote an account called Audiences with the Longhouse Emperors, and it provides some interesting insight into the Reachmen conquerors. I remember standing behind the councillor I served, trying to not show how badly my hands were shaking as I prepared the quills, ink and parchments for the Emperor's daily decrees. As frightened as I was, for I had heard all the stories about how the Black Drake conquered our empire, I couldn't help but notice how hard Emperor Durcorach was trying. He obviously had no formal education and knew precious little of the cultural protocols of the imperial court, but he wanted to carry himself as an imperial. He demanded to be taught the proper procedures, and despite his clear unease and frustration, he only had one aide killed during that audience, an act which, incidentally, allowed me to complete my apprenticeship early. As an aide, I only had the privilege of standing before Durcorach a handful of times. Despite how hard he tried, he could never divest himself of his crude and violent nature. It could be said that Durcorach, while fit for conquest, was never given to administration, and he grew restless in time. The Black Drake refused to rest on his past victories and continued to wage campaigns to capture more and more territory. In 541 of the Second Era, he led his forces through Craglorn to Evermore before engaging in a lengthy siege against Wayrest. He eventually grew restless as the defenders refused to yield and turned his attention toward Daggerfall. This was the Black Drake's undoing. Stopped at the gates of Daggerfall, Durcorach and his forces were caught by surprise when Emeric of Cumberland and his army attacked from the rear. In the ensuing battle, the Black Drake fell, reportedly slain by Emeric himself. Durcorach's death did not end the reign of the Longhouse Emperors, as many had hoped it would. No, Durcorach's loyalists still held Cyrodiil, and his son Moricar, already a vital advisor to the throne, declared himself emperor as soon as the news of his father's death reached him in the imperial city. The 23-year-old Moricar, raised as a true son of the Reach before being turned over to imperial tutors in his teens, walked in both worlds in a way his father never could. Emperor Moricar's own son was born the following year, in 542. He named him Leovic. Emperor Moricar held the Ruby Throne for 22 years, the longest of the three Longhouse Emperors. The accounts of Sentanus Marilyn are again useful. The Black Drake's son and successor, Moricar, was a different story. He combines the characteristics of both Reach and Cyrodiil in a strong and capable leader. Raised with an imperial education that blunted but could not completely erase his Reach upbringing, Emperor Moricar could engage in the political nuances of the imperial court while also demonstrating the ferocity and ruthlessness that made his father so feared. But Moricar's fear included a grudging respect. He was more than a savage playing at emperor. He ruled with both his physical prowess and his cunning mind. I saw both in action the first day I entered his throne room. He was locked in a debate with his mentor Abner Tharn and Councillor Leviticus, arguing the best way to bring the province of Hyrok under control after Durcorach's death, campaigning in that region. He listened to Tharn and Leviticus each present the risks and benefits of different options. He considered for a few moments, then ordered me to prepare a decree declaring that the Daggerfall Covenant would be considered an independent and sovereign nation, and commanded Tharn to negotiate peace along the Empire's western border. We cannot afford to throw more lives away trying to subjugate that obstinate region. It was my father's quagmire. I shall not let it be mine." While quick to deal peacefully with the Daggerfall Covenant and its territories of High Rock and Hammerfell, Moricar did not forget he led an empire. In the north, Skyrim had been split into eastern and western kingdoms over a century ago when the Reachmen Empire fell, and there was a succession dispute when the High King Lorkh was assassinated. The kingdom of western Skyrim was ruled by King Svargrim of Solitude during the later part of Moricar's reign. The holds of Hafingar, Falkreath, Whiterun, Hjormar, and Carthold all were part of his western kingdom. Emperor Moricar intended to subjugate this region, which would help ensure the proliferation of the Reach, which this kingdom bordered and often harassed, and vice versa. In 563, Emperor Moricar led his forces out of the Reach and into High King Svargrim's territory. They met no resistance until they approached the Gates of Solitude. There, High King Svargrim's massive army fell upon Moricar's forces, routing them in a single battle. Moricar returned to the Imperial city defeated and gravely wounded. Despite the best attempts of both Imperial and Reach healers, Moricar never recovered from his injuries. He died in 564 and was succeeded by his son, Leovic. By this point in history, Cyrodiil had been ruled by Reachmen for 31 years. A whole generation had been born and lived in an empire which was ruled by the Longhouse emperors. From the accounts of Sintatis, I was a much older senior aide when Moricar's son, Leovic, ascended to the Ruby Throne. He was another student of Abnathan's, but one who was raised totally within the Imperial mindset. He had visited the Reach rarely, having grown up knowing primarily the abundances and excesses of life in the Imperial epicenter. Of the Longhouse emperors, he was the most cosmopolitan, the most imperial. Some considered him weak and overeducated, even spoiled. But he had the same core of iron as his father and grandfather. He just hid it inside a velvet glove. My first meeting with him after he took the throne was a revelation. His court felt more like the courts that existed before the rise of the Longhouse emperors. There was hardly any mention of the Reach or the practices of the Reachfolk, at least not that first time. Later, my visits, which were much more frequent now that I was a senior aide, to the throne took on a new perspective as Leovic began to embrace his heritage. Initially, it looked like some sort of passing fancy, the Reach fetishes, the demands for the kitchens to retrieve the recipes preferred by Durcorach and Moricar, and then things took a darker turn, when Leovic had idols and shrines to the Daedric princes installed around the throne room. He was definitely becoming obsessed with a tradition and culture that he had no intimate experience with, and that obsession, I'm afraid, led to his eventual doom. Emperor Leovic's fascination with his Reachfolk heritage, which, unlike his predecessors, he hardly knew, caused him to develop more eccentricities as time went on, and this culminated in an incredibly rash decision. When he declared that Daedra worship was legal in 576 of the Second Era, he further outraged the imperial populace and ignited Varan Aquilarios' rebellion. In 577, the reign of the Longhouse emperors ended when Varan stormed the imperial palace and killed Emperor Leovic. Varan declared himself emperor, and the remaining Reachfolk in Cyrodiil retreated back to the Reach. And so ended the reign of the Longhouse emperors, a short-lived dynasty of 44 years, about 2 generations. It was after this point that the Reachmen quickly sunk back into irrelevance. The Three Banners War ignited, Molag Bal and Manamako began the apocalyptic plane meld, and Tamriel was beset by issues ad nauseum. However, back in the Reach, following the downfall of the Longhouse dynasty, a powerful figure rose to power and secured his domain. Introducing Ard Caddach, the Despot of Markarth, member of the Black Drake clan, cousin of Emperor Leovic, the last of the Longhouse emperors. As a young man, Caddach served in the Reach Guard of Emperor Moricar and proved himself a warrior wise beyond his years. During his time in Cyrodiil, Caddach received an imperial education to go along with his military training. When Moricar saw the need to establish some degree of imperial authority over the increasingly restless clans of his homeland, he chose to appoint a trusted kinfolk to the task. He sent Caddach back to Markarth. To reassure the clan chiefs that he did not intend to impose imperial law in its entirety on the free Reachfolk, Moricar limited Caddach's writ to Markarth and the lands immediately surrounding the city. Thus, the clan chiefs were satisfied that Caddach was only to keep order in Markarth and otherwise leave the clans to rule themselves. Governor Caddach administered Markarth effectively for the rest of Emperor Moricar's reign and retained his place through the troubled years of Emperor Leovic. During this period, Caddach ruled in the Reach manner. His judgments were swift and brutal, and he was awarded the moniker Despot of Markarth. When Leovic was overthrown and the remaining Reachmen retreated to Cyrodiil, Caddach claimed power in his own name, taking the old Reach title Ard. it means Lord of the Fort. Next, he brutally purged his own clan, murdering or exiling all remaining Black Drakes who might challenge him for leadership. In any event, 15 years of control over Markarth had provided Caddach with the opportunity to build the undisciplined warriors under his command into a loyal army ready to support him as a king. As Ard, Caddach claims that he has no clan but the Reach. As long as the clans take no other king and answer his calls for warriors at need, he does not seek to govern them or interfere in their internal affairs. The Reach clans accede to his control of Markarth, grudgingly in some cases. No single clan or plausible alliance of clans can challenge Caddach's army. In the 5 years since he claimed the throne and discarded his title as governor, the Despot has slowly consolidated his power in Markarth, transforming the old fortress into a crude city-state and a capital for a free, independent Reach. Now, as to what manner of man Caddach is, the best word I can use to describe him is pragmatic. He is careful not to force a Reach clan to do something it doesn't want to do, unless he is certain of his strength and advantage, in which case he doesn't hesitate to use all the force at his command to bring an unruly clan to heel. This is the main reason for our difficulties in getting the Despot to broker a truce with the clans that threaten High Rock. Caddach has no interest in provoking them to defy his own power for the sake of peace on our border. He is willing to use any tool to attain his goals, imposing laws, of a sort, in Markarth, ordering the keeping of written records in Understone, seeking the advice of more powerful covens, and making and breaking alliances whenever he sees the need. The Despot's true genius, however, lies in his political calculation. To the Reachmen, he speaks of a free and independent Reach, holding true to Reach tradition and scorning the weak ways of Outlanders. His words, not mine. But underneath that Reach for the Reachfolk bluster, Caddach uses the trappings and systems of imperial authority to transform Markarth into a functional state for the first time in the Reach's long and bloody history. And while no Reachfolk might admit it, many understand that the Despot's consolidation of power and the relative peace he enforces around Markarth are necessary steps towards real and lasting changes for the better. Whether the more xenophobic clans continue to accede to Ard Caddach's authority or rebel against him is, of course, the great question of the Reach. Throughout the course of the Greymoor chapter of the Elder Scrolls Online, Ard Caddach manages to make great strides in his plan, even so far as to have a fragile peace between the Reach and the eastern and western kingdoms of Skyrim. For how long this state of peace lasted, we cannot say, but by the closing days of the interregnum during the conquests of Tiber Septim, some 270 years or so later, the Reachfolk once more faced an assault they could not withstand. The Reachfolk are one of the most enduring peoples of Tamriel, and at that, a very interesting window into what life could have been like for Tamriel's earliest inhabitants. Their perspectives and lore regarding the Daedra are invaluable to any Daedrologist, and I hope in the years to come we are able to learn far more about the intricacies of their culture and early history. Maybe Elder Scrolls 6, if set in Hammerfell and High Rock, would be the perfect setting to explore more thoroughly the Reachfolk clans of the Western Reach. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed this in-depth exploration of the Forsworn and more broadly the Reachmen. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.